Did you know Shostakovich collected antique clocks? He was a fanatic with time. He would actually do tests where he would nail things and time the amount of time, how long exactly it took to get through the mail system. He was a referee for football games for the soccer team in Moscow, and then he was part owner of one of the soccer. He was a sports fanatic. This is Shostakovich.
That quick clip there is one of many things that we talk about on today's episode. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and where to even begin doing an intro for Barry Green? I don't even know where to start. He's a close friend of mine. It's been so great to get to know him over the years. We've been involved in many projects together over the years, too, and I'm just a general admirer of everything he's done in his career. Definitely one of the most interesting musicians I have ever met and spent time with. So we're catching up today. We did this online bass summit, co-organized this thing. It feels like we just did it, but it was like March, April last year. Oh goodness, where has the time gone? So we talk a bit about that, but also about what Barry has been up to recently, including Stringersize, which I was actually around for some of the early iterations of that with his Bassercise program. We talk about the art of a note, this cool article that he wrote recently. We've got that linked up to Stringersize, linked up to in the show notes as well, and just life in general, how Barry approaches projects and some other ideas he's got cooking up. This was a great time for me. I always love catching up with Barry, and we were talking probably for who even knows, 40, 50 hours easily in March and April into the summer. And so it felt weird actually not to talk to Barry until just the last few weeks. So great time for me. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Quick shout out to our sponsors, Dorico, Ear Trumpet Labs, Practisema, and Modacity. More on them later, but let's get into this conversation with my friend Barry Green. It's been a minute. How have you been?
It's been too long, man. We haven't been in the bars. We haven't been on the video. We've been busy, but it's almost like with so much the same with Andres, with dear friends. You know, it could be 2 years, 5 years, 5 minutes, and it's always the same. So.
Well, I like seeing how your Zoom background has evolved, because the setup you've got and everything, that where you're arranged, that area has changed a little bit since the summer, hasn't it?
Actually, I'm using my big computer. My laptop is over here to my left, which I normally use, which would send you more in that direction.
Oh, okay.
So this is showing you more of, now we're more into the whole room. But the computer's so much bigger, and I've got the Yeti hooked up to this. And it's been some weird things were happening before when I was on my laptop. After about 40 minutes, the sound started to get broken up and fuzzy. Have you ever had that happen? And it never happens. It's much clearer on the big computer. So I don't know what that was. So I've been using this for Zoom. It's and I feel like I'm in a pilot's control here, because I got the computer, I got this, I got my papers, I got my bass.
No, it's great. That's good. My gift to myself after the summit was this 2020 MacBook Pro, this like beast of a laptop. So things have been working better just for me ever since, because my last computer was 5 years old and I'd been spending 8 hours a day on it for 5 years, and so it felt like a real upgrade.
You're entitled to it, for God's sake. That's your work. It should be primary. So, well, that's good. And you're in your regular place. You used to be in the kitchen or looking into the kitchen.
I moved. I was so sick of it, and I had all my wine bottles behind me, and so I had to get into this weird angle or have all the booze in the background, which I don't normally mind, but it's just kind of a weird Zoom background. So yeah, we got this desk, and so I've got like a little more of a computer station here now. Since
Are you standing? Is it one of these high or sitting?
I'm sitting right now, although we may replace this with a standing desk. We're still, we moved in just before right after the pandemic hit or right around that. So it was kind of haphazard buying furniture and the like. So I think that my wife uses this a little bit for her work too. And I think we may invest in a standing desk, but right now it's just a seated desk.
You'd have them with the accordion thing, or where the computer goes up or down, whatever. I'm thinking about that too. It looks very attractive. It would be nice, but I don't spend as much time. Actually, when I'm working on a project, yes, I do. I live down here. So I'm actually, for the first time since March, I've had some days when I'm just sitting around and I'm watching television. I'm telling Mary, she says, I love you this way. And I say, I don't know. I was thinking about another little thing about maybe Jewish music, my next little step. And she just throws her arms up in the air and says, whatever. But I told her the last project that I did, which was, the article. I didn't say a word when I was walking down. I didn't even tell her I was working on it. And then towards the very end, it took a good week of working on that. I said what I've been doing, and I was really happy with it. And I said, when it's all done, because I was waiting for the copy editor that I used in Chicago to clean it up, clean up the English. And waiting for the final piece of artwork from Sharon, that pretty little bass note or pearl note. So once I had that, I says, I want to show it to you, and it'll take you from 5 to 10 minutes to read. And so I says, would you be able to do that? And she says, of course. And then, but I reminded her, I said, look, with that article, I kept myself quiet. I didn't obsess. I didn't talk about it every single day. I come up and she says, I don't want to hear every little detail of every little thing that you've done. Every time you lift your right hand, you say, my right hand went up high or low, whatever. And so we're working on that.
I get very excited in similar ways. My current project has been doing these. I'm calling it stupid bass history, or I might come up with a better name. But I'm taking and creating these kind of digital marionettes of some. I did it with Dittersdorf last week, and I go through the life of Dittersdorf, and I'm learning how to animate them in Adobe After Effects, and and so my poor wife has to. I bring her over and I put some dance track on, and I've got Dittersdorf dancing around, and it took me 5 hours to figure out how to do it, but those have been well received. So I
got to see that, and it's a great idea. So what's the theme?
I was inspired by Bob Oppelt of the National Symphony. He was one of our summit people. He did an edition of the Dragonetti waltzes. Very nice edition. And I've been finding myself doing more and more reviews for my YouTube channel, which has actually been doing pretty well. But nobody's going to click on something that says review Dragonetti 6 waltzes. So I called it like, who was Dragonetti? And some sort of like clickbaity title. And it performed really well. And I had I've been photoshopping myself into these photos. So I put my face on Dragonetti and all this goofiness. So then I did one on Kusevitsky, and which I had a lot more material on because the whole ghost story and all that, I had David Murray on tape talking about Kusevitsky's ghost and how he sort of Gary Cars had encounters with him and the like. And so I made this cheesy Kusevitsky ghost, and I flew him around and I had him run behind me. And then this Dittersdorf has been the best received, I'm trying to work on, that's my latest pandemic project.
That is awesome. That sounds what's the ghost thing? I've never heard about the ghost thing.
Oh, you haven't? It's supposedly the spirit of Kusevitsky. Apparently, both Inez and Inez has said that she has actually sensed this presence around that Car Kusevitsky base. But apparently, Olga Kusevitsky, when she was seeing Gary play in his town hall recital or something, she saw the ghost of her late husband come up and put his hand on Gary's shoulder. This is the tale that David told me anyway. And Gary and Harmon have said they've never actually seen the ghost, but they've kind of sensed him. And so I had this ghost story that I kind of wove into the video, and And so so I'm just doing. I'm finding myself doing more and more bass research, like into the history of the instrument, and I've been picking up a couple of books on bass history. So I've got a bunch of topics like that coming up in the future, but I'm trying to make it a little bit dumb at the same time.
Well, it's 2021, so we have to do it for the times, and that's virtually all of our projects, even in this year, have been reincarnations of maybe the same things, but the format and the appeal and the technology and using all of this stuff and integrating all these things is just it's a different time. So that's necessary. And that Russian program that I did, which I still haven't been able to play. I mean, it is just filled with that kind of stuff, of something totally unique about every composer, and you get to see them, you see movies of them, and you're really brought into it, completely different, and yet it could accompany traditional bass music or a lot of music as well. So so that's what we have to do. It's our obligations. I mean, the kids in the schools are still doing the same things. They're still studying the same literature, but if they want to play beyond their junior or senior recital, they're going to have to come up with something unique.
Well, you're like the godfather of projects like this to me. I can't wait to actually see you play that Russian program because you and I'm thinking back to Andres's event, where we played Simone's California duets. That thematic. Remind me what was the overall theme of that program?
Yes. What was the theme? Well, they were all duos. I know that.
Yeah.
But there was a theme that dealt with, was it transportation?
Yeah, I remember that. That was definitely woven into there. And then it had this sort of evolution. It was just like whether we're thinking of Anna's Promise or any of the I love these multimedia projects that you do.
There was a subtle connection between everything that would emerge, but it wasn't written as a story that you needed to follow from point A, B, C. It's just that they all had this all in common, and so it brought you into that cultural whole thing, you know. So yeah, it has to be something like that. That's for sure.
Well, it's interesting to me that, and I feel similar impulses, so I feel a kindred spirit in this sort of thing. But, you know, you have something like this art of the note that you decide to go in depth in terms of article form, right? And you and I chatted a few years ago, it seems like 20 years ago now at this point, but about Chair Factor, that article that you wrote. And so some of your projects take the form of like this From Russia. Is it From Russia with Love? That's the...
Yes.
Yeah. So some take this sort of multimedia approach. Some you decide to go deep on an article. How do you make that decision? That's just a question from somebody who plays around in different formats too. Like what makes something turn into an article versus something on the bass versus, maybe that's a bad question, but I'm just curious.
No, it's a great question. And the answer is, I don't know. I mean, I just, you know, The Mastery of Music, that book that I did, was based on over 120 interviews of world-class musicians on 10 different topics about humanity, about a human spirit. And the chapter on creativity was with composers and improvising musicians. And I have learned so much from every one of these musicians. I live by so many of these principles. But one of my favorite ones, not only from Dave Brubeck, but was the Minnesota composer Libby Larson, female composer, writes beautiful choral music. But she gave me two life lessons that I kind of live by. The first lesson was, let your trash can be your best friend. Okay, so with me writing and creating all things, man, it feels so good when I work at something so hard and then I get to throw it away because it's no good. But Libby said it's okay. So that's my friend. And then you're freed of all of this space to move forward. And the second principle was, she talked about creativity and and getting ideas, and that in a given day, we have thousands of impulses that cross our mind. And she says there's what we call a moment of go. All right, the moment of go is when you say, hey, wait a minute, let's do something with this. That you get an idea, you honor the idea, and then you take it a little further. And so these ideas come up all the time. And talking with Dave Brubeck, it was the same kind of thing, how he gets all these ideas for what pieces to write and what are the themes of his music. And so he could be driving in the car and he notices his windshield wiper going at a certain rhythm. And then all of a sudden he gets an idea for a piece, or he's going over, driving the country. And then there's a pattern in the road where it's hitting his tires, and he gets another idea. And then he's thinking about his friends. When I talked to him, and he decided to do an album based on the phonetic sounds of his best friends. Each tune was based on it. And at that moment, he goes to the piano and he takes my name and he starts composing a piece based on Barry Green, Barry Green, da da da, and making jazz out of it. So you put all these things together, they become a part of who you are. And when I get an idea on wanting to do a concert, I want to play this piece of music, how can I do this? I was invited to do a Russian music for a house concert that was a benefit for my wife's church. And so I thought, gosh, there's plenty of good Russian music. And so when I'm getting closer to thinking about it, then COVID came and I had more time to work on that project. I started to make a list of the composers, and one thing led to the next, and I just followed that trail. I said, I don't want to just get up and play Kusevitsky Valse Miniature. Let's find out something that these non-music people that have never heard the bass before would be interested in. And then I started reading about the composers, reading one thing to the next. I would find unbelievable stories about each composer. And I said, this is the story, and if I could play the music and accompany the music with the narration and then the visuals. And I started to find videos of Shostakovich and Glier and Rachmaninoff and Khachaturian and Kusevitsky, and I could bring them into the program. It just keep coming and coming and coming. It was just, that's the way it works. One thing leads to the next. But I do take credit for having a high level of that moment for go. When I get an idea, I don't just dismiss it. Mary gets very nervous when she's around me. As soon as she sees that look on my face, she says, uh-oh, here we go again.
There is this mode in my practicing app, Modacity, which I totally love. It's called Deliberate Practice, and it's such a cool feature. Here's Modacity founder and CEO Mark Gelfo on how this works.
One of my pain points as a musician was not really having a method to generate reliable improvement. And deliberate practice is like the scientific method for music practice. So what you do is you identify the one thing that you want to improve, be it articulation, intonation, emotion, comfort, whatever it is you want to improve, and brainstorm or choose one of the pre-suggested strategies for that area of improvement, and then test it out. Record yourself trying that strategy, listen back, and press yes, it worked, or no, it didn't work, to create that improvement.
It's such a clean way of tracking your progress. I do it every day, and it has done wonders for my bass playing and just my overall enthusiasm for music. You got to check it out. Modacity.co is the site, and if you go to our site, you can click through it and get a special offer for lifetime access for this app. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity. This episode is brought to you by Dorico, the advanced music notation software from Steinberg. And one of the coolest things about this piece of software, there's so many things, but one of them is their popover option, and it has sped up things so much for me when I'm working in scores. Here's Senior Product Manager Daniel Spreadbury on how popover mode works.
There's like hundreds of notations that you might want to create, and trying to remember what to type, is it Command Shift Alt, Vulcan Death Grip 7 for this particular notation. But the nice thing about a popover is all you have to remember is the letter of the thing you want to create. So D for dynamics, T for tempo, M for meter, K for key signature.
It might seem like a simple thing, but you would not believe how much that has sped up my workflow. And I'm not even really a composer. I do a lot of arrangements, I do a lot of exercises, but it has taken my workflow probably at least up to 5 times faster. Just that one mode. I can't say enough good things about Dorico. I love it. I use it every single day. There's a free version, Dorico SC, that you can download that lets you do practically everything for up to 2 stabs. So check it out. Dorico.com will take you to their page on Steinberg's website. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast.
Well, I know you well enough to sort of get the sense of that, I think. And I'm thinking back to this spring, and you were emailing me about what ultimately became the Bass Summit. And I thought, oh, Barry's got an idea for a project. And just fun to watch a very different format of project, but another project. And to watch how something which started off as maybe it was going to be 15 people and kind of trying to replicate the Ohio State Bass Camp, turning to something that we raised tens of thousands of dollars for the International Society of Bassists, had people from all over the world, people waking up at 3 a.m. in Australia to take part in it. And I kid you not, last night I was doing somebody else's podcast, and one of the people on is named Jim Lambie, and Jim was a participant that whole week and still is talking about how meaningful that week was to him. So there's another project that is yet another form, not an article, not From Russia with Love, but another cool project. And boy, that seems like it's so hard for me to have a sense of time right now in 2020. That seems like it just happened. Like I feel like I was just on Zoom with you planning this, but that was in late March, early April that we were initially talking about that, right?
Absolutely. That's when it started. Started in March when we got sequestered. And when it was inspired, it all started from the Bass Camp being canceled. And then us, you and me, saying, now what are we going to do? And I realized we have these pieces that are possible to make it something more. And one thing led to the next. That is a classic example of something started really, really small, and it ends up with, 400 or 500 participants and 70, 80 clinicians, and raising tens of thousands of dollars for the ISB, and helping a lot of people. We've really could take some pride in what that did for so many people at that time. And it was at the very beginning, and after we got in on the ground floor, I think that was a really, it's one thing to have a good idea, another thing is to do it at the right time and in the right place. And that's another component that we have to be very careful about, but we were lucky with that one.
Oh yeah, well the stars aligned for that one, that's for sure. But I mean, so many projects. I mean, we could talk about whatever. I could have you on every day of the week for the podcast. But so many things in your life. If you look at it from an outside perspective, you are very receptive to the idea of going big on a project. Whether it's and it's cool because I think some people sort of put a box around their idea, and even if you go big and it doesn't go exactly as planned, you still might end up with something much more interesting than if you had decided these really strict parameters.
Well, one of the reasons for that is that, and I hope this doesn't sound too self-absorbed, but the fact is that I'm really not playing for just bass players. I mean, when I do any particular project, I want it to be something that anybody could understand, and that goes to us as musicians, but includes everyone else. So even if I do a concert, I want to create an event that would be of interest for the public, period. And so all of these things are dual track, is that it satisfies my bass desire to make music on the bass and satisfy me as a bass player, and then at the same time use the bass as a tool to make some creation that's for everybody, that anybody could understand. And you have to go, there's a larger audience for that as well. I mean, my Green Machine series all started out with going to the opera and Aida and seeing how everybody packs the place in when the elephant comes. And so I figured I was doing my Green Machine concert series, and I figured, well, if everybody's going to go to the opera when the elephant comes, why don't I get the elephant to come to my concert, and they'll come to my concert too. And it all started with that. And I did a zoo program, family zoo program, all based on animals. And we had the elephant come, and I rode out on the elephant and played David Walter's Elephant's Gavotte, and the elephant danced to my music. And we went on and on and on from that point on. But it's the same kind of thing. Well, my gosh, let's create a family experience and have a party.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, another recent project that certainly went big in my eyes, that Stringersize, that was inspired, and we haven't talked about any of this for the podcast, but that was inspired by an exercise class that you and your wife went to, right? Isn't that the idea for that?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's called Silver Sneakers. Went to the exercise class at the Y, and they play this crazy music, popular music. For me, one of my favorite tunes was this rock tune by CC Music Factory called I Want to Make You Sweat. And it's just a groove with kind of rap over it in one key, but you're lifting weights and you're getting all this exercise. And I was thinking, wow, this is a great way to practice shifting or vibrato or whatever you're doing, and to have so much fun and get involved in the experience without the attention on doing something that you might not want to do as often or as much. And so, for example, with string crossings, we'll have a 5 or 6 minute routine of constant string crossings. But if the music is so fun and it changes so much, nobody's aware of that. Before you realize it, my gosh, you've been practicing string crossings for 5 or 6 minutes. And then the one thing led to the next. The whole theme of Stringersize is using popular music grooves, every single style of world music, for 4 different categories of musical exercises. Category of scales, all based on different grooves, whether it's jazz, funk, rock, klezmer, Latin, swing, classical. Our scales all have based on that kind of music. Technical exercises, just like what we're talking about, where you're doing CC Music Factory and you're doing shifting and string crossings and vibrato and sound production, articulations, all these different kinds of techniques. But the most important thing for me is that with Stringersize, it's more for the musician, for all musicians. And it started out as Bassersize, and then it became Stringersize just for the same purpose. And then obviously Bandersize may be coming in the future. But to deal with the musician, when we deal with the musician, then we're building a whole concept that the music isn't on the page and it's not in the instrument, it's in the person that's communicating. I'm so thrilled with the 2 categories. Half are technical, having to do with technique and scales on those ethnic grooves, but the other half deals with musicianship and expressing a method for how do you put feelings into the music. And so the musician exercises are all about multitasking, playing your music and dealing with something as a person, dealing with singing, dealing with moving, playing and move, playing and sing, playing and listening, playing and looking what you can be seeing. And they build beyond the notes. Your attention is not about that. It's about what it includes, what it represents. And that is unique. I mean, I'm very thrilled with that. The final program is also growing, and that is that nobody that has seen this program has ever seen a method for how do you practice feelings, expressing feelings. And so we've created very simple 8-measure programs with videos on initially 8 feelings, and that's growing. And the feelings, for example, the feeling of beauty, feeling of being quiet, of happiness, of compassion, of anxiety. I've got my famous shark attack for tremolo with anxiety, love, power, celebration. And most recently, this is news for you and the bass world too, Andres Martin has just jumped on the Stringersize train, and he's going to be contributing a whole bunch of files for me. And his first set, he wanted to do a set of feeling, add to the feelings. So he's writing kindness, he's writing sunshine, he's writing peacefulness, he's trying wonder and amazement. And he's going to also add some Latin, salsa, tango, milonga to the scales. And we're going to deal with minor scales with Andres.
This episode is brought to you by the Practisema Practice Journal. And here's author Susanna Klein on one of the biggest challenges about practicing.
Practice is so painfully incremental. That's just the nature of it. And so anytime we can kind of make it lighter, give it like a little jolt, or make it, oh, that was a little better. Or we trick ourselves, like, when we're talking about doing rhythm practice, some of that is for the fingers. A lot of it's just for our head. Like, it gets you to, oh, now I'm listening to these notes. Now I'm listening to these other notes more. Now I'm listening to these notes more. Yeah, you could just play the whole thing like god awfully slow, but boredom is terrible for the practice room.
I'm a big fan of this journal. I've gone through all 16 weeks myself on my own personal journey. It is so cool what Susanna's created. It's packed with research-based strategies to turn your ho-hum practice into extraordinary practice, and it really works. Learn more at Practisema.com, where you can download the introductory chapter of the journal for free. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. After several years of planning, I'm so happy that my course, Beginner's Classical Bass, is out on Discover Double Bass. This course is made up of 66, yes, that's a lot, video lessons which cover a wide range of topics on classical double bass, starting from taking your bass out of the case, which is very fun to film, and Jeff Chalmers of Discover Double Bass and I have a great blooper reel about that, and leading to different bow strokes such as staccato and portato. The topics also include posture, simple scales and arpeggios, left-hand technique, bowing technique, simple pieces which are fun to play, practice tips, and much more. You can learn more through the link in the show notes, or just visit discoverdoublebass.com/Jason Heath.
Won't that be awesome?
Oh, I can't wait to check it out. I mean, it's fun because I got to be a fly on the wall for Basercise summer 2019 at the Ohio State Bass Camp. I've got some video I'll try to remember to link to on my Instagram account of you going through some things. I was just struck by the how you're using video to communicate these various things, whether it's shifting or just the multimedia experience. Again, I think is super cool. And then I remember sitting at your place and you were planning out Stringersize and what it was going to become. And then December 2019, you did something at the Midwest Clinic, correct? That
was the first demonstration of it. Yes.
Okay. And you started working with Bob Gillespie at Ohio State also on Stringersize. So that's super. So when did the initial idea, when was that exercise class in CNC Music Factory? Like, I'm just curious about how long between the idea and demoing it at Midwest.
That took a whole year.
Okay. But still, a year is not that long.
Well, I took the exercise class. You're right. I took the exercise class in the fall and then played with that for 3 or 4 months before the idea even came to me, until it was winter. And then but the entire, actually it was a 2-year project. Stringersize has been in development, and now this is the second full year. But it took a year and a half to this, a little more than a year and a half to this point. So the development was Basercise from probably February to June. And then from June, I started to collaborate with Gillespie, and we made it Stringersize. And between June and December, we readapted and added more to the library to make it for all strings. And then since December, it's been a whole nother year of doing that and then publishing it and putting it on the website and engaging more and more people. There's like 11 teachers that are involved with this now in the different clinics. There's over 65 clinics and 31 exercises and over 8 hours of content. And nothing is over 5 or 6 minutes long. So there's a lot of stuff there.
Well, I can't wait to see it in person. I sorely regret my decision to not go to the Midwest Clinic this year. I just didn't want to go back to Chicago. I think I was in Chicago in December already, and I didn't want to make another return flight. Now I wish I did, because who knows when I'll ever leave my house again. but how cool, and that it's out there now. It's out there in the world. People can check it out. People can pick it up, right, for their students.
Yeah, you can get it at stringersize.com, and there's free samples on the website. You could get it through my website, or you could just go stringersize.com, and there's a whole introductory video of about 5 minutes that just gives you the whole tour of everything that's on there, on all of the individuals that are involved, and then several sample files. And then in January, we're even looking at starting a program. It's initially was a subscription thing, an annual subscription thing, but I think we're taking that away and make it just, we'll still maintain the website so we could update it. So it's not for downloading, but it's just a one-time fee. And then you got it as long as you live. And we can go from there. And we may also have in January even a 30-day free trial. So you can start the first 33 days, you don't have to pay anything. So you know exactly what you're getting. If it works for you, great. It could go for the individual musician, for the teacher with their student. It could go in a classroom setting with a whole string ensemble. Initially designed to be projection in a classroom, but we also designed it so that it could be done as we did at the Bass Summit with your computer or even your mobile phone if you get it close enough to you. And then there's PDF downloads for everything, so that if ever you're in a situation where you couldn't get close enough to the screen, you could still read off of some music if you needed to.
So you weren't planning for a pandemic when you were putting this together, but it's something that people could certainly use, particularly when they're trying to think, what the heck am I going to be doing with my students? And I just love how in this project, or any project, I can think of your various books going back to the inner game of music, that behind the music, that the inner emotion of music, what you were just talking about with Andres and his bit, that's like if I think of a through line through everything I've taken in that you've done over the years, that's like a through line through everything, at least from my perspective.
Well, it goes back to the same principle, is that we're not technicians, we're musicians, and we're people, and we're making a statement with our instrument about communicating some kind of energy and some kind of gift for someone else. And that's where all of this is coming from, is that so often we get caught up just in the technique. It's not external. It's not on the music stand. It's not in your fingers. It's not even on the bass. It's who you are. What is it that you have to say? What do we want to communicate? We're no different than actors or dancers or writers or anyone else. We're expressing ourselves, and we're sharing beautiful things in the world that we love to share.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's pretty cool. There's so many things, and again, I could have you on every single podcast, and we never run out of things to talk about. And I mention you often in conversation as somebody to check out, just in terms of pursuing their passions and just bringing things into the world in really interesting ways. I'm not trying to butter you up. I have no reason to do that, but like some of the contributions that are even outside of what we talked about, like the reason that so many people know about Francois Rabath and his teachings and that how that's been incorporated, it is directly tied to you. Obviously, other people were inspired, but my goodness, I remember back to when I was in high school, Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I had one of those Rabath Institute video cassettes from the early 90s or something like that. And this is a totally different time. I was living in hundreds of miles from a major city, but I had this. I'd order off Lemur Music, this VHS cassette, and I'd put in and I'd watch you and Paul and Rabath, and I learned so much just off of that cassette. The reason why the International Society of Bassists exists the way it does, I mean, we know that Gary Carr started an organization, but there are two things we didn't even talk about, that if that was all you did, if even one of those was, that would be something that would be in the double bass history books. The Energy of Music is something that would be in music history books just in general, I think. And it's just so cool to see you continue to evolve through all these different projects. So I know you tend to look forward, which is a thing I really admire. But if you just look, it's pretty incredible. When the Barry Green biography is written, that will be an interesting and varied book for sure.
Well, that's very kind. And yeah, I look forward. I don't look backwards. And most of the things that I get involved with are 4 or 5 year projects at a time. And so I could say where I am in the beginning of a project is that we're just starting this. For example, the concert programs now. I mean, the Anna's project of those 3 stories, that's 5-6 years right there. And I'm still doing that, and I still love to do that. But now and then Stringersize will continue to be developed. It's right in the middle, but it's at just becoming public. And so that's going to take some time and some passion, but it's now a complete project that will just get nurtured rather than just developed. The most recent thing has to do with maybe this new journey with kind of concert programs, almost similar to what you're doing with your videos, is how to bring some history and make it interesting and still have the bass. In a sense, it's almost a return to what I did when I started to play solo bass concerts 50 years ago, because that was with new music, putting out new music and working with new composers. And so now I'm fascinated. The Russian experience was transformational for me. I haven't even played it yet. I won't even get a chance to play it for months, but it's ready. And it is so filled with cool stuff. I think the reaction to that, because it's literature that's there. This isn't like I'm dealing with the story that's already there. I'm not creating a new story as in Anna. And I think it will help people change the way they listen to music when you hear it. For example, I just saw, I don't know, about the new documentary on Netflix on the Bee Gees, actually.
Yeah, I haven't watched it yet, but I've seen that it's out now.
Oh, it is so amazing. It's like a couple hours worth, but changed the way I listen to music. I mean, they have done so much music, and it was such a brilliant documentary. They had essentially 3 phases of their life, when there was the early group, and then they had the disco group, and then post-disco, when that didn't become a fad, when it went out, then they started writing for all the greatest singers in the world, and they were composers. And then he's the one, Barry, is the only one who's left. But the reflection of the whole thing, I mean, my head's been spinning for 2 days from that. And when I hear any of that music now, it's just changed the way I hear the music. And so that is the kind of insight. It's essentially going deep into the lives and to talking to the individuals. I'm fascinated with that. I mean, maybe I'll become a documentary person of some kind. But the Russian program, there's so many interesting things that you would not believe. I mean, like Shostakovich. Did you know Shostakovich collected antique clocks? He was a fanatic with time. He would actually do tests where he would mail things and time the amount of time, how long exactly it took to get through the mail system. He was a referee for football games for the soccer team in Moscow, and then he was part owner of one of the soccer. He's a sports fanatic. this is Shostakovich.
I had no idea.
All of these things. And then on top of that, he was a Jewish sympathizer, and it was a communist time, and he wrote this series of 11 poems, Jewish poems, on the Jewish plight in Russia. Many, they were persecuted. They went to the concentration camps, to Siberia, and those, he was still loyal to the government. So all of his music, we know, is often very sarcastic and against war and whatever. And so this was a similar series of songs that he had written, which were never allowed to be played or published in Russia as long as he was alive, until he died. And then after he died in the 50s or something, then these Jewish songs became published, because that was the law. And I'm using one of these lullabies with again, his image, the pictures of the work camps, of the people in chains, of the, bringing you completely to that experience, of persecution. This is all the same composer. This is Shostakovich. And then I've got 9 other composers, each one something totally unique. And I'm so excited about it. Rachmaninoff, for example, I loved it. He was amazing. He was like 6 feet, 6 inches tall. He had hands that would be an extension of hands as a pianist that was inhuman. I was a big family person. And he was offered, when it became possible to travel, he was offered a whole year residency to be conductor of the Boston Symphony, and he's also offered the directorship of the Cincinnati Symphony in 1917. And I actually have a picture of the Cincinnati Symphony in 1917 with Rachmaninoff, and he turned down all of those offers. And he even had a piano concert. He had 3 offers: a piano tour throughout all of America, and then these 2 directorships of the orchestras. Actually, Cincinnati at that time was only one of 5 orchestras going on in the country, because we were the 5th oldest. I'm in Cincinnati. We're the 5th oldest orchestra in America. So it was a really major orchestra. Stokowski was one of our conductors, and so we were getting the big people. Let me get that. Okay. But this is amazing stuff. One more, Borodin, who wrote Polovetsky Dance. Would you know that he was a doctor, a physician, a chemist, and he started the first school of medicine for women in Russia?
I had no idea.
for women doctors. And he also was Jewish. People don't know that. He wrote, his music was used in musicals, Kiss Me Kate, and a couple others. The melodies, Strangers in Paradise, and another piece is based on his 4th string quartet. It's just really crazy stuff. And so I've dug up that kind of things on each one of these composers. It was so fascinating becoming an academic for a while, and then I'd get the kernel, and then I'd go find the video, and I'd find pictures and stories about them, and it goes that way. So that's a little preview of that. And just yesterday, when I came downstairs, when I told Mary I was interested in doing a similar program with Jewish music, I started to find out all of the Jewish composers, and I couldn't believe so many of the Jewish composers hid their Jewish identity, because when they came to America, they had to assimilate their Jewish identity to work. And so many of them did that. Some had to convert before they came to America. Many were forced to convert to other Christian religions. But the list of popular music, Jewish composers from the time that goes all the way back to Glier, and They're not as many of the older composers, but all the way through to the present, the written music that we know. I was initially wanting to do a whole overview of Jewish music, but then I could realize I could just deal with popular songs that we know from Jewish composers that we didn't know that were Jewish. I mean, like Paul Simon, beside Mio, Schumann, Strauss, Johann Strauss, the whole Strauss family, they had Jewish blood in them. Lalo Schifrin, Copland, Leonard Cohen, Alleluia, Glier, once again, Leonard Bernstein, Irving Berlin, Steve Reich, Paul Dukas, Sorcerer's Apprentice, who would think? Vinyavsky, the great violin guy, Kurt Weill, the period from the war, Mac the Knife. These were all Jewish composers. Pretty interesting. It'd be a lot of good music there.
Wow. Well, so here we are at the beginning stages of another project. So I can't wait to see the Russian program, in action, and how cool it is to go put on the academic hat and learn all these things. I didn't know any of that about Shostakovich, and also how cool when you find a connection to where you're living, like Cincinnati, and I think it's so interesting. Like people, if you haven't spent time in Cincinnati, you might not and thought about it, you might not realize just the whole evolution of the United States, how early a city that really is, given where it is, the geographic location, and many reasons. I remember walking around downtown Cincinnati with you and like marveling at all these buildings. It's one of the old cities in the United States, and you might not think of it if you just look on a map. But
late 1700s, really, it was the third largest city in America at one point because of the Ohio River, because it was all steamboat traffic that went from the Great Lakes all the way down through the Lake Erie, and then down through the whole state of Ohio on a canal. And Cincinnati was a canal city surrounded by canals and linked with the Ohio River that took you all the way down to St. Louis and New Orleans. And that was all there was to the United States. That was it, riverboats. And to this day, we live on the river and we see the riverboats still going back and forth, as well as the barges, and all the traffic was that way. It's a great history. German tradition, Jewish tradition, and beer and pork tradition. And unfortunately, we have a bad football tradition going on. But yeah, lots of traditions, and music has been a great culture because, as I said, it's the fifth oldest orchestra. That was one of the only three orchestras to continue to play during the war. All the others shut down. And they're actually still playing now, believe it or not, with COVID. They are doing some free programs, and they're going back sooner than other people, which is really good to hear.
That's cool. Yeah, that's heartening, especially here in California. There's no sign of anybody doing anything. So we'll see as we go forward. But it's funny, and again, we could do this every week, and it'd be a different program every week. But talk to me about the article, which so it's The Art of the Note is the name, and correct me if I'm getting these wrong. But you're drawing parallels between singers and how they approach music, how bowed string players approach music. Like, what was the inspiration? And just talk about what you. This week-long project that you did. Yeah,
well, it came from teaching. I mean, it came from working actually with some of my best students at the very highest level. And in working, I've only been teaching at Ohio State for 2 years. This is my third year. And so the first year, all those students are gone. And the second year are the people the students that I currently have that are in their second year. So it's a beginning relationship. It's not as if I'm teaching my advanced students that I've had as private students for 4 or 5 years or 6 years. This is the most I've had. It's really, really good people, mature people, but it's only my second year with them. Mm-hmm. And so we're dealing with really refined concepts. And I don't know, I just, for me, I learn from my students, period. I mean, I learned different ways to express. Everybody's unique. They bring out different things in me as a teacher, and they show me things that I can use for myself that makes me a better bass player. So I'm a thief. But essentially, this whole concept about, it actually started with the exercise on bow direction changes in Stringersize, on how to create a perfect bow change where the string keeps vibrating so that the string isn't stopped by the bow every time you change from a down bow to an up bow, but the string keeps speaking, and it becomes so human. And I think the keynote of this concept is the concept of portato or portamento, where if you play 4 down bows and you keep the bow going, wah, 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 then it's clear that the string keeps vibrating and the bow just keeps re-engaging and disengaging. And from that concept, if you could do bow changes in different directions and create that same sound, wah, 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 so that the string also continues, but it's not the same direction, it's a different direction. Whoa, that's totally different than ba, 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 ba. It started from that. And then I started to think about how the string stops vibrating. So the question is, I came up with this just yesterday thinking about it. Do you bow the sound, or does the bow make the sound, or does the sound make the bow? Okay, so if your bow creates the sound, then you get the sound of the bow. But if the sound is created by the bow, then you're dealing with resonance. You're dealing with the resonance of the instrument. Like if you play a pizzicato, you articulate with your finger and you create a sound, correct? So your finger just touches and lets it go and vibrates immediately. Well, the bow needs to do exactly the same thing, that the bow activates the string, which creates the sound. It doesn't make the sound. And if you just make the sound with just the bow, then there's no variation. It's just a ah, 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 as opposed to boom, boom. So it's got a beginning, it's got a middle, and it's got an end to the sound, and it's got a natural thing. So what we're striving for is what I call, I make a pun out of it, the double bass sound. The real double bass sound is the sound not of the string vibrating or the bow vibrating the string, but it's the sound inside the instrument that's making the vibration and it's resonating. And you can actually hear both sounds. You can hear the bow sustain the sound, but then underneath that, you could also hear the sound of the vibration coming from the instrument. And that whole thing is something that I was teaching with, playing fast music, and with one student is playing a Bach Courant, da 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 da. Okay, so he's playing da 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 da, never lets the bow leave the string. Okay, and how you could create a round sound with every single note, so you neither hear the articulation and you never hear, you hear all 3 aspects of the note. Bum, 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 da, 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 da. I'm even articulating with my tongue, but it isn't that. It's wah, 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 wah. Mm-hmm. So it's got a whole complex part. And so once you're aware of that, it changes everything. And that's what I'm getting into with the art of the note. Is we spend a lot of time mastering the beginning of the note. You've got a fingering, you've got a bowing, you got a pitch, you've got an articulation, you got a dynamic, you got so much stuff going on, and that's a lot. Well, we work on that. We master that. That's what everybody practices. Get all the notes. And then the next thing is, now let's get all the rest of the notes. So you're just chasing notes all the time, as opposed to what happens after you get to the note? Okay. You don't even think about that. And that's this whole concept of the pearl explains that whole idea. Is when you think about, wow, somebody plays, there's so much clarity and separation and identity to it, one single note, that it just sounds so beautiful, like a string of pearls. Okay, that was the one of the keynote expressions, a string of pearls, and that's why the image is the note being a pearl. And the question is, how long does it take to make a pearl? How do we make a pearl? Well, it takes years, and it starts with a little shell, but then it gets all of this attention, and it finally gets matured. And my question is, how much time with fast notes do we spend nurturing each note so that it has a whole sound, a beginning, a middle, and even an end? Once I become more aware of the middle and the end, I start talking about that with the students. They start listening for it. Oh my gosh, it's a transformation. It's a huge difference. No articulation sound whatsoever that they can play. You don't hear any bow. All you hear is the vibration of the instrument, and it sounds like a voice. It sounds beautiful. Gary Carr, from the first time when I was 17, 18 years old, heard him play, he would talk about his relationship with Jenny Terrell, this inspiration of the singer, working with the singer. And every time I had an opportunity to work with singers, it elevated my playing and changed the way I play. I changed my articulation. But I recognize that that's really cool. I really play well when I'm playing with a singer, but I play differently when I play as a bass player. But now all of a sudden I realize, hey, that's wrong. You don't need to do that. This singing, play what you sing what you play what you sing, is such a critical thing, is that we emulate the voice. And the bass has that same potential. All string instruments have that same potential to talk and to speak with articulation and a variety of sounds, but they have shape to it. One of the most interesting things I learned from even writing the article was at the very end, I looked at a bouquet of flowers, a beautiful bouquet of flowers besides the pearl, because we're talking about the notes. But then the question is, in music, we have a lot of notes. So how do we see a beautiful bouquet? Is that it's surrounded by not solid flowers. You don't see arrangements of flowers where it's just nothing but well, you do see that sometimes. When you see tulips, sometimes it's a beautiful collection of lots of tulips. But when you see an arrangement of flowers, you see it surrounded by space, by baby breaths, by different shaped flowers, different colors. And there's all kinds of ways that the flowers stand out because of the background. You know, they emerge because they have a shape around that. And I think of the notes in virtually the same way, that the notes will become more beautiful if you make a bouquet out of them, which means they have to be surrounded. They have to stick out in some way so that they are complete in themselves, like those individual pearls. And then this is what inspired that work. And it's working with the students, because I've got some of these kids playing with a different kind of articulation, different kind of a bow, suppleness to their bow hand, because they're no longer, rigid and stiff with their hands. They're listening and feeling for the vibration and paying attention to the ends of notes. It's now a common part of their vocabulary. What about the middle? What about the end? So often when you play fast notes, I'm the worst offender, never really worked on the notes in between the fast notes, the second, third, and fourth note. It's always a series of notes. And until I really started to get those notes, slow it down so slow, and really create that and find a way after they're slow to increase the tempo so they still sound slow when you're playing them fast.
How cool! So I'm going to be thinking about all these things when I go to the bass later today and work out some things. And how cool that you drew that out from lessons. Right now it's really cool. And there's another thing in the Barry Green biography that the influence you've had as a teacher. I'll tell you all these South Dakota memories. That first book you put out was in the 70s sometime, right? You were pretty young at the time.
Are you talking about the fundamentals of double bass?
Yeah, so that was the book I started on. That my teacher, who named Chuck Kreitzer, he had gone to school in Denver. I don't remember who he studied with anyway, but that was his method for me. So, have you got it back there?
I got it back here somewhere. The little green thing, and actually, it has the back. The music that's on the cover is from Frank Proto's bass concerto that he wrote for me, Concerto No. 1.
Wow.
It's kind of really funny, but I kind of so I'm honored that was meaningful, and at that time it was it for me. But I can honestly say I disown that book because it's just not where I'm at now. I mean, it's
sure.
Like 50 years ago.
But how cool is that? Just that ever looking forward thing. I think is just really exciting. And I think that it's cool that you disassociate yourself with that because you're a different person now. And a lot of people, they might kind of feel like they're the exact same person looking back at that book. But how cool that you're playing in the evolution and of course like the influence of Francois on what you've done. And and now you're continuing to evolve and you're continuing to think about these things in new and different ways. Here in 2020, you're putting out new articles about these subtleties but they're not necessarily subtleties. They're things that you're finding making an impact, and it's just really cool. So I don't have any point to this. Just kudos on that, and it's been fun to follow along through the years from my connection with your work, and I guess one more thing, like, okay, so Frank Proto, that can bringing that into the world, and the pieces that you've brought into the world through Andres Martin and so many other composers. That's another really exciting thing, that just the pieces that have come out of the work that you've done that we'll be playing for years.
No, thank you very much. What can I say? I'm just getting warmed up. That's what I'm just getting started. Honestly, I feel that way. I mean, it's just there are people I have seen and met, people that get out of college and then they're done learning. They're finished. They've gone through school, they've met their teacher, and they've learned their way to play, and that's when it stops. They'll never play a concert again, a solo concert, because they graduated. And if they got a job, they're perhaps in an orchestra or not. But in terms of, we see this as teachers, we see it as professionals. There's a point at which you can stop your learning or your life becomes learning, period. And in fact, Timothy Galway told me when I started to collaborate with him with the Inner Game of Music from the Inner Game of Tennis, he said he had never met somebody who wanted to collaborate with him that was only interested in learning, ever, period. And that's why he chose to work with me. I think I'm the only person he co-authored with, because he felt I was honestly interested in this to develop, which I was, and I am. But not everybody believes that. So many people strive to reach a level or to accomplish something, and then they're done, and so it's not the end, it's the journey, which is the inspiration, that we use music as a partnership to accompany us, to go through life, to enjoy the joy of learning and growing. And that's why I don't even understand, nor do I know how to spell the word retire. It's not in my vocabulary because that to me would be the end. I can't imagine that. And yet I have students that have retired, but that's beside the point. I mean, everybody has to find what gets them through life themselves and what makes that meaningful.
Well, I think you said something at the Bass Summit along the lines of you've never worked in a day in your life because you love what you do, or you've been retired since you graduated school because you've always, from Cincinnati Symphony on, you've been
at
pursuing.
21, when I got my job. Yes, that's when I retired.
I love
I
it.
never worked a day in my life, and it's true. It's so true.
Yeah, I think that's that's healthy.
We, Jennifer Lopez, I love her. She also reinvents herself quite a bit. She's a remarkable person and an amazing teacher. Amazing. Watching her coach dancers, it's like a musical masterclass. But what she tells them, which is really so beautiful, is what they're looking for with these dancers that are in competition. She says, I'm waiting for the goosies. Okay, the goosies are goosebumps on your arm, and she pats her arm like this. She says, and on juries, I wait for the people that will make me put my pencil down so that I have to just stop and listen. You know, we're living for these moments of awe, these moments of arrival, and especially the goosies.
I love that.
So my wife makes fun of me for watching some of these reality shows, but I'm watching them when there's competition, not for the competition, but to see the growth and to see those moments of transformation. That is what we're striving for, is to see that happen. That's really, I think, what's exciting.
Yeah. Well, a pleasure as always. I'll link up to the site, the article. There are so many things to link up to, but we'll do it again soon, I'm sure. But just thanks for carving out some time. It's fun to see you again over Zoom after we probably spent 40 hours on Zoom earlier this year planning that summit. So
that's for sure. Well, it's a pleasure. What you have done puts my body of work to shame. In my comparison, in the body of videos and audios and the things that you're doing for the bass is an unbelievable contribution to our instrument. So I'm right back at you for whatever you've thrown at me. It's a total admiration and gratitude. And someday I'll interview you.
I'll look forward to that. Thank you, Barry. What a great time catching up. Folks, I don't even know where to start. Innergameofmusic.com is Barry's website. Recently redone, by the way. It looks great. And we've got Stringersize linked up. We've got that article linked up. And I'm sure you already are familiar with all the multiple projects that Barry's been up to. But he's somebody that I find so inspiring. I get so much just rejuvenation and joy hanging out with him, talking to him, learning from him. He's somebody who, if I'm feeling down in the dumps, I look at Barry or I talk to Barry, and he just takes me up a few levels. And that's a mark of a great person and a real friend. And I hope you enjoyed this. I could talk to Barry every day of the week, like I think I said in that conversation, and always have something new to talk about. That is one of the fun things about doing this podcast. I don't even know how many times I've had Barry on the podcast, and that pales into comparison of times that I've spent with Barry at various conferences across the world, really, and working on different projects. And that's just one of the fun things about this weird niche that I have stumbled upon, of which I guess this podcast is kind of like the fuel. I feel like this today, the day that I sit down to do all the podcast stuff, it feels like I spend a lot of time on the podcast. But otherwise, and I do this once every 2 weeks, I just lose a day. it's 3:48 p.m. I've been working on this stuff since I woke up this morning, and I'm on intros and outros number 2 of 4. I do 4 episodes at a time. So that day feels like a lot. Maybe there's a way I can shave some of this time down. Maybe not, but Otherwise, I sort of forget that the podcast even exists. It's just something I've been doing for so long. It's just another part of my life, like working out or taking out the trash, not to equate it with taking out the trash or working out, I guess, but it's something that I've just done for so long. I don't even really think about it. And I sort of forget that people listen and follow along. So if you're listening and if you're at the end here, I know you're a true fan or you've been kidnapped and your punishment is you're being forced to listen to this podcast forever. So sorry if that's the case, but thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. I have a great time doing these. I'm guessing that comes through, and it's a great excuse to talk to super interesting people like Barry and the other folks that I have on this podcast. I have no rhyme or reason for reaching out to people or who I reach out to or when I reach out to them. I do things in batches, like I've said a few times here in the outro. I'm always ahead in terms of episodes, so I kind of feel like this is like a giant, slow-moving vehicle, this podcast that turns very slowly. So like when COVID hit, I was talking about conferences for like a month on the podcast because I had all this stuff in the can. It's far from real time. Not much of my projects are in real time these days, but it's something that I really get a lot out of. I would have these conversations with Barry and other people on the show, even if I had no podcast, but this is a great way to carve out some time. So I guess I'm talking about podcasting on my podcast. How meta. Okay, I will close this out by thanking the team who puts these episodes together. They are Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Mitch Mooring, Trevor Jones, and Krista Copper. Mitch makes beautiful basses in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. MitchMooring.com is his website. Look for him on an episode soon as a guest. I've never had Mitch on the show. I kind of did a few years ago when he was part of this luthier panel, but we got a solo episode with him, and I'm thrilled to put that out. I'm your host, Jason Ethan. We will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.